My daughter took my social security check and left for the beach, leaving me alone in our old brownstone with an empty refrigerator and nothing to eat. She went off smiling, certain I would be weak and desperate by the time she returned. She never imagined that when she came back and opened the fridge for dinner, she would scream in pure shock. Greetings, dear listeners. Before I begin this story, a story about betrayal, quiet cruelty, and the moment an old woman finally chose herself, I ask you to support this channel. Please subscribe, press the like button, and write in the comments which city or country you are listening from. It truly warms my heart to know how many of us are out there, listening, thinking, and surviving together. Now let me tell you what happened. The front door had slammed shut hours ago, but the thick, sugary scent of Quintessa's perfume still lingered in the hallway. It felt far too loud for our brownstone, a place used to calmer smells, old wood, time-worn fabric, dust resting peacefully on bookshelves, and dried lavender tucked into drawers years ago. That perfume felt like a stranger had invaded the house and refused to leave. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the closed pantry door. The silence around me was complete. Once I loved this silence. After long days hunched over my sewing machine, eyes strained from tiny stitches and fingers aching from pulling thread, silence meant peace. It meant rest. It meant the day was finally over. But that evening the silence felt wrong. It felt as if the house itself was waiting. My stomach tightened into a knot. I hate admitting this, but I was hungry. Not the dramatic hunger people talk about in movies. Just simple, ordinary hunger. The kind that grows persistent as evening falls. The kind you can't ignore no matter how proud you are. I opened the cabinet. The hinges creaked in protest, as if annoyed by my expectations. The shelves were spotless and completely empty. Quintessa had packed in a hurry. I could still picture her flying through the apartment like a tropical bird trapped in a cage, tossing bikinis, light sundresses, sandals, and tanning lotions into her suitcase. Everything colorful. Everything unnecessary. Everything paid for with my money. She had stopped in the doorway, shoes already on, phone in one hand, suitcase in the other, and stretched her free hand toward me. "Mama, give me your card. Just in case." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. That's my entire social security check, Quintessa. What am I supposed to live on for the next 2 weeks? "Oh, don't start," she said sharply, rolling her eyes. She snatched the card from my fingers before I could pull it back. "You're always inventing problems. You have grits. Boil them. Add water. It's fine. Honestly, it's probably good for you. Doctors say people your age should watch what they eat anyway." She smiled, already bored with the conversation. I deserve this vacation. And then she was gone. She flew to Miami, to sunshine, loud music, and drinks with little umbrellas, taking my money, my peace of mind, and, as I would soon realize, my food. She had mentioned grits. I reached for the old glass jar on the top shelf, the one labeled in my handwriting more than 20 years ago. The moment I lifted it, my heart sank. Felt suspiciously light. I opened the lid. At the bottom lay only a few lonely grains, mixed with gray dust. There wasn't enough to feed a sparrow. Certainly not enough to feed a grown woman. She had lied. Or maybe she hadn't even bothered to check. Perhaps she simply didn't care. She had thrown words at me to silence my worry, and forgot about me the second she ordered her ride to the airport. A coldness spread through my chest. Not the kind of cold you feel from a draft, but the kind that grows inside when you realize something painful and irreversible. The realization that the child you carried, fed, protected, and sacrificed for isn't just selfish. They are cruel. I closed the jar and placed it back on the shelf. The sound of glass against wood echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. I had to do something. Maybe there was loose change somewhere. Quintessa often shook coins from her jeans pockets and left them scattered around the apartment like breadcrumbs. I walked to her room. Chaos lived there. Clothes were thrown over chairs. Lipsticks lay uncapped on the vanity. Receipts and old notes littered the floor. I searched carefully under magazines, inside drawers, along shelves. Nothing. Then I noticed a crumpled piece of paper lying near the trash can, missing it by inches like everything else she did halfway. I picked it up and smoothed it out on the table. It was her hotel reservation and flight itinerary. The numbers jumped out at me immediately. The amount she had spent on 2 weeks of rest equaled 3 months of my benefits. 3. I stood in the dim light of her room, feeling the walls press inward. For years I had darned old stockings instead of buying new ones. I had worn the same coats since before the century turned. I denied myself fruit, treats, and warmth so she could have better shoes, then college supplies, then nicer clothes because everyone else has them. And there it was. 3 months of my survival spent on cocktails and sand. I left her room and shut the door firmly, as if sealing off not just the mess, but the illusion I had lived in for years. The living room greeted me with quiet dignity. In the pale glow of street lamps filtered through heavy curtains stood my so-called treasures. An antique oak buffet, heavy and carved like a tombstone. Behind glass, crystal and fine porcelain waited patiently, unused, untouched. This is for Quintessa's wedding, I used to tell myself. The wedding never came. On the sideboard stood a silver tea service passed down from my grandmother. In the closet hung fur coats Quintessa called dust collectors, though they were worth more than she ever admitted. Jewelry lay in boxes I never opened because I had nowhere to go wearing such things. I looked around and finally understood. This wasn't a home. It was a museum. The Quintessa Johnson Museum. And I wasn't the owner. I was the unpaid curator, dusting exhibits, guarding valuables, and slowly starving so someone else could one day take everything without even saying thank you. My stomach growled again. But this time something else stirred beneath the hunger. Clarity. Cold, sharp clarity. I walked to the coffee table where old newspapers lay stacked neatly. Quintessa always scolded me for keeping them. Trash, she used to say. But I knew better. I flipped through the pages until I found what I was looking for. The classified section. A small ad I had circled days earlier without admitting why. Buying antiques, silver, porcelain. Honest appraisal. House calls. I stared at the telephone. Grits, you say? I whispered to the empty room. Then I picked up the receiver. I stood for a long moment holding the telephone receiver, listening to the steady dial tone. It sounded calm, reliable. Everything my life hadn't been for years. I took a breath that tasted like dust and old memories and began turning the dial, one number at a time. Each click felt heavy, like I was unlocking something that had been sealed shut for decades. The line rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Hello, a man answered. His voice slightly raspy but polite. This is Alistair Sterling. Good evening, I said. To my surprise, my voice didn't tremble. My name is Yuli. I'd like to sell some antique silver. Sterling flatware. There was a brief pause. Then interest entered his tone, professional and alert. What period? Early 20th century, I replied, glancing toward the living room. Excellent condition. A full set. I see, he said. I can come tomorrow morning. Yes, I answered. That would be fine. When I hung up, the house was still silent, but it no longer felt predatory. Felt attentive. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the armchair opposite the oak buffet, watching the shadows move across the walls as cars passed outside. I felt like a guard on duty, protecting treasures before surrendering them. But slowly something shifted in my thoughts. I wasn't surrendering anything. I was reclaiming myself. Mr. Sterling arrived exactly at 9 the next morning. The doorbell cut through the house sharp and clean. I opened the door to a man in his early 60s, dressed neatly in a gray coat, wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. His posture was polite, but his eyes were sharp, eyes that measured value instinctively. Mrs. Yuli? He asked. Yes, I said. Please come in. Don't worry about your shoes. He stepped inside and immediately took in the living room. I saw his gaze pause, just for a moment, on the furniture, the paintings, the silver glinting faintly behind glass. He had expected clutter and cheap trinkets. What he found surprised him. You have an interesting home, he said carefully. This isn't a home, I replied. It's storage. I opened the buffet and lifted out the heavy velvet-lined case. The latch clicked softly as I opened it. Inside lay 12 silver spoons, thick and ornate, engraved with grapevines and old family monograms. Mr. Sterling put on white cotton gloves and leaned closer. He examined one spoon, then another, turning them carefully under the light. Early production, he murmured. Excellent condition. These were hardly used. They were never used, I corrected. They were admired. He straightened and removed his glasses. "This is a valuable set," he said. "Most people accept scrap price. But that would be a shame." He named a sum. It equaled 5 months of my Social Security. A month earlier I would have fainted from relief. I would have accepted immediately and hidden the money like a frightened child. But something inside me had changed. "No," I said calmly. He blinked. "Excuse me. You will sell these for far more than that," I said. "I'm not asking for market price. I'm asking for a fair one." I named my number 40% higher. For a long moment he studied me. Then he smiled, slow and amused. "You're not as simple as you look," he said. "Life teaches," I replied. "All right," he said finally. "We have a deal." When he left 10 minutes later with the case, I stood alone in the living room holding a thick stack of bills. My heart pounded, not from fear but from something else. Energy. Adrenaline. I hadn't just sold silver. I had crossed a line I'd never crossed before. I didn't hide the money. I placed it carefully in my purse, put on my best beige coat, the one I saved for special occasions, and walked out of the house. My feet carried me somewhere unfamiliar. Not to the discount supermarket with yellow tags and wilted vegetables. I was walking downtown, toward the gourmet market I hadn't entered in 15 years. The prices there once frightened me too much to even look through the window. That day I didn't look at prices. The doors opened and warm air wrapped around me. Coffee, fresh bread, spices I couldn't name. I walked slowly, deliberately, like someone returning to a place they had once been forbidden from entering. At the deli counter I spoke without hesitation. "Half a pound of prosciutto," I said, "and some Virginia ham." In the cheese section I chose aged Parmesan and soft brie with truffles. I added olives stuffed with almonds, a crusty baguette still warm from the oven, and then I saw them. Peaches. Large, velvety, glowing like they held sunlight inside them. "Two," I said. "The best ones." I added cold smoked salmon, thin and translucent, and carried everything home in paper bags that felt lighter than they should have, because they held something more than food. They held permission. At home I didn't eat in the kitchen on the oilcloth table. I went into the living room. I took out a white tablecloth with handmade lace. Quintessa never allowed me to use it. "You'll stain it," she used to say. "That's for guests." "Today," I said aloud, "I am the guest." I laid out my food carefully. I rolled the ham into rosettes, cut cheese into cubes, broke warm bread with my hands. Juice from the peach ran down my fingers as I bit into it. The taste stopped me. It wasn't just sweetness. It was relief. It was the realization that my body mattered. That my hunger mattered. That I existed. When I finished eating, only crumbs remained. I felt full in a way I hadn't felt in years, not stuffed but complete. I stood and walked back to the buffet. Where the silver case once sat was now an empty rectangle of lighter dust. I took the grocery receipt from my purse and placed it there, right in the center. "Dinner," I whispered. The days that followed passed quietly. I woke when sunlight touched my pillow, not when fear pulled me from sleep. I ate croissants for breakfast instead of watery porridge. On the 7th evening, I sat in my armchair with a glass of red wine when the phone rang. I knew who it was before I answered. "Mama." Quintessa's voice burst through the line, loud and triumphant. In the background I heard waves, music, laughter. "How are you holding up?" "Still alive." "I'm fine," I said calmly. She laughed. "You're probably hungry. Remember, add more water to the grits. Makes them last longer." I took a sip of wine. "I've found some resources," I said. She laughed harder. "Resources? What?" "Loose change in the sofa." She hung up, confident. And I smiled because she still had no idea. After that call, I sat for a while with the receiver still warm in my hand, listening to the empty dial tone as if it were the ocean she could hear and I could not. Outside, the city hummed softly. Inside, the apartment was quiet, no longer the kind of quiet that felt like punishment, but a quiet that felt like space. Quintessa had always spoken to me as if I were a burden she was forced to manage. Even from the beach, she had to remind me I was powerless. She needed to picture me hungry, anxious, and grateful for crumbs. But I wasn't. Not anymore. I looked around the living room at all the things I'd spent years protecting. For so long I believed that if I preserved everything, silver, porcelain, fur, jewelry, Then one day the sacrifice would mean something. As if saving these objects was proof of love. That night I realized something simple. Objects do not love you back. And people who take your life from you don't suddenly become kind because you saved them a treasure. The next morning I did not call Mr. Sterling for the wardrobe like I had originally planned. That enormous oak closet in the hallway was expensive, yes, but moving it would be loud and slow, and I wanted something quicker, something personal. I went to my bedroom and opened the top drawer of my dresser. Inside lay a small jewelry box I hadn't touched in months. When I opened it, a brooch caught the light immediately. Gold shaped like a twig, tiny diamonds scattered like dew, and a dark ruby in the center, deep as old wine. Quintessa adored that brooch. She never asked to borrow it. She simply took it when she wanted to feel important, pinning it to her blazer before a date, an office party, a dinner with friends. She wore it like proof the world belonged to her. And I let her. I held it in my palm. It was cool at first, then warmed quickly against my skin, as if the metal itself remembered all the times it had been claimed without permission. I dialed Mr. Sterling. He arrived, punctual as always, and the moment he saw the brooch, his eyes lit up the way a professional's eyes do when they recognize a rare thing. He examined it carefully, breathing out as if he'd forgotten to breathe. "This is not ordinary," he murmured. "Natural ruby. Old-cut diamonds. Strong craftsmanship. Possibly late 19th century. How much?" I asked. He named a price. It was enough to live comfortably for half a year. I didn't bargain this time. I didn't want to. I wanted it gone, not because the brooch was evil, but because it represented something I was finished with, being treated like a storage box for someone else's future. "It's yours," I said. When he counted out the bills, the brooch sat on the table for one last moment, sparkling softly in a sunbeam. Beautiful. Predatory. Unfamiliar, like it had never truly belonged in my life. "You know, Mr. Sterling said as he placed it into a pouch, "pieces like this usually come with stories." "It does," I replied, taking the money. "But the story ends here." When he left, the empty space in the jewelry box felt strangely peaceful. Not scary. Not sad. Promising. That afternoon, I did something else I'd avoided for years. I ordered food delivery, real food, from the restaurant I always walked past with my eyes down, pretending I couldn't see the prices. When the operator asked what I wanted, I spoke without hesitation. "Crab and avocado salad," I said. "Veal medallions with mushroom sauce. And a bottle of champagne. The coldest one you have." When I hung up, I felt a spring uncoil inside my chest. Quintessa would be back in a week. She would come home glowing, hungry, and smug, ready to scold me, ready to count her inheritance. Let her. I would drink champagne and toast to the one thing she never expected me to find: self-respect. But later that evening, while looking for paperwork for a painting in the living room, a landscape with a river that Mr. Sterling had mentioned could sell for more if I had documents, my fingers hit something strange. A thick plastic folder shoved deep beneath stacks of receipts and old magazines. It wasn't mine. The folder was bright red, the kind of loud color I never bought. My stomach tightened as I pulled it out into the light. Inside were several papers stapled together. On top lay a glossy brochure with cheap printing and smiling photos of elderly people playing checkers. Restful Meadows State Facility. For seniors and veterans. The name made my skin prickle. I had heard it before. The neighbor upstairs, Miss Theodosia, once spoke of it with disgust. Bleach smell, boiled cabbage, rude staff, old people left staring at ceilings for days. A place people were sent to disappear. My hands began to shake. I pushed aside the brochure and lifted the papers underneath. A draft of a general power of attorney. My name. My address. My information typed neatly at the top. And under agent. Quintessa Johnson. I read the list of powers with my mouth slightly open, unable to breathe properly. Right to manage property. Right to represent me in medical institutions. Right to sell assets. Right to decide where I would live. In the margin, written in pencil, was a date. Next month. Immediately after her return. The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself. This wasn't her being careless with my money. This wasn't her forgetting to buy groceries. This was a plan. A cold, calculated plan. She wasn't waiting for me to die to get what she wanted. She was tired of waiting. She was preparing to check me in like an old broken appliance, dump me in a state home, sell my belongings, and live freely while I lay in a room that smelled like bleach and defeat. My eyes burned, but tears didn't come. Instead, a fury rose up, so sharp I felt it in my teeth. But the fury didn't turn into screaming. Turned into action. I shoved the folder back into the drawer but left it slightly open like a wound I wanted to see so I wouldn't forget. Then I grabbed the phone. When Mr. Sterling answered, my voice sounded different, tight, direct, steel. Mr. Sterling, I said. It's Yuli. Have you gone far? I'm still nearby, he replied, surprised. Is everything all right? No, I said. But it will be. I took a breath. Come back. Bring a truck. We're clearing everything out. There was a pause. Everything? He asked slowly. Mrs. Yuli. That's a serious decision. I'm sure, I said. I've never been more sure. He arrived within the hour with two men who moved quietly and carefully, like they understood this wasn't just furniture. The painting came down first, leaving a light rectangle on the wallpaper. Then the grandfather clock, silent now, wrapped in protective layers. The Persian rug rolled into a heavy cylinder. Boxes of porcelain carried out like fragile bones. With every item removed, the room felt lighter, brighter. Not emptier, freer. It felt like they weren't hauling away valuables. It felt like they were removing stones from my lungs. Mr. Sterling wrote checks and counted bills. The total grew until it became a number I could hardly hold in my mind. A fortune for someone like me. Are you sure you won't regret this? He asked quietly as his men carried the last box to the truck. I will regret one thing, I replied, looking at the bare floor where the rug used to be. That I didn't do it sooner. When the truck drove away, I stood alone in the echoing hallway with money in my hands and a new kind of calm in my chest. I didn't waste time. First, I called a cleaning service. I need a deep clean, I told the dispatcher. Walls, windows, floors, everything. Today. Then I ordered flowers, huge, fresh lilies, just because I wanted beauty in my home. And finally, I placed the most important order of all. Groceries. Not ordinary groceries. I went online to an elite delivery service, the kind I'd only heard celebrities mention. I filled my cart without looking at prices. Caviar. Truffles. Fine cheeses. Cured meats. Exotic fruits. Belgian chocolates. Vintage champagne. When the operator called to confirm, she sounded stunned by the total. Yes, I said calmly. Deliver today. By evening, the apartment smelled like fresh cleaning, lilies, and something else I hadn't smelled here in years. Possibility. When the couriers arrived with heavy thermal boxes, I led them straight to the refrigerator, our old humming Kelvinator. I opened the door. It was empty, clean, and bright inside. Load it, I said. They stacked the shelves until they sagged with abundance. The top shelf lined with blue tins of caviar. Champagne bottles nestled side by side. Cheese and meats arranged like luxury displays. Bright dragon fruit and golden mangoes filled the drawers. Chocolate stuffed into the door shelves until there was barely room to close it. When they finished, the refrigerator looked unreal. It wasn't a fridge. It was a vault. An edible vault. When I shut the door, the latch clicked with finality. I stood there with my hand still on the handle and whispered, almost lovingly, "Now we're ready." The waiting did not last long. 2 weeks passed quietly, almost peacefully. The apartment felt different, lighter, cleaner, alive. Sunlight moved freely across the floors now that nothing blocked it. I slept deeply. I ate well. I breathed fully. Then exactly at noon, a key scratched loudly in the lock. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my back to the hallway, holding a thin porcelain cup filled with real Darjeeling tea. Not the cheap dust in bags I used to buy, but fragrant leaves that bloomed slowly in hot water. I didn't turn around. The door flew open, hitting the wall with a crash. "Mama, I'm home." Quintessa's voice rang out loud and triumphant, filled with the confidence of someone returning victorious. The smell of airplane fuel, sunscreen, and hot asphalt rushed into the apartment. Her suitcase wheels rattled across the parquet floor. "I hope you've had enough time to think about your behavior," she continued. "I'm exhausted, hungry, and I don't want to hear complaining." She expected darkness, dust, The smell of medicine and stale air. She expected to see me hunched, guilty, rushing toward her. Instead she froze. "What is that smell?" she asked suspiciously. "Lilies." Fresh, bright lilies stood in a tall vase by the hallway. A soft trail of sandalwood and jasmine perfume followed me as I calmly lifted my cup and took another sip. "Why does it feel empty?" she muttered. Her eyes darted around the living room. The Persian rug was gone. The clock was gone. The walls were bare and clean where paintings once hung. She frowned, irritated. "Whatever," she snapped. "I'm starving. They fed us garbage on the plane." She marched into the kitchen without looking at me, already rehearsing complaints. "So what do we have here?" she said sharply. "I hope you didn't forget to buy butter this time." She walked straight to the refrigerator. Her hand wrapped around the handle. I spoke quietly. "Go ahead." She yanked the door open. The light inside flared on. And Quintessa screamed. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was raw animal shock. She stumbled back as if she had seen something impossible. Her eyes moved wildly over the shelves. Row after row of blue tins, champagne bottles, wrapped cheeses, truffles in glass containers, bright exotic fruits glowing under the bulb. The refrigerator was packed beyond reason. Overflowing. Groaning with abundance. "What is this?" she whispered. She reached out and touched a jar of caviar, as if checking whether it was real. It was cold. Solid. Heavy. She turned to me slowly, her face losing color. "Mama," she breathed. "Where did this come from?" I met her gaze calmly. "I was hungry," I said. "And you took my card." Her expression twisted instantly. She grabbed a jar and thrust it toward me. "This is insane. This costs a fortune. Did you steal? Take loans? Do you know what kind of trouble you're in?" She rushed into the living room. That's when she noticed everything. The empty spaces. The missing furniture. The silence where the clock once ticked. She screamed again. "The silver!" she cried, holding the empty velvet case. "The jewelry! The clock!" She spun toward me, panic overtaking arrogance. "We've been robbed," she gasped. "You forgot to lock the door." "No," I said evenly. "No one stole anything." She stared at me. "I sold it." The phone slipped from her hand and hit the floor. "Sold it," she whispered. "My inheritance?" I stood up slowly. "You took my check," I said. "Left me nothing to eat. A person has to survive." Her face hardened into rage. "You ate my future," she hissed. "That was mine." Before I could answer, she rushed back to the fridge and began grabbing items. Caviar, champagne, chocolates. "I'll return this," she shouted. "I won't let you waste everything." "Put it back," I said. "No." I slammed my palm on the table. The sound echoed sharply. "Put it back." She froze. "You have no money, Quintessa," I said calmly. "You spent it at the beach. This is my food." Her grip loosened. Slowly she placed the items back. "You're insane," she whispered. "I'm calling an ambulance." She dialed emergency services, her voice shaking as she claimed I was having a breakdown. I opened a jar of caviar and took a spoonful calmly. "Try to prove it," I said softly. 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. She rushed to open it. But instead of medics, Miss Theodosia from upstairs stood there, followed by Mr. Sterling. Quintessa's face collapsed. They entered the kitchen. Miss Theodosia stared at me, calm, well-dressed, composed. "This is madness," Quintessa cried. "She sold everything. She's not competent." Mr. Sterling calmly opened his briefcase. "All transactions were notarized," he said. "Your mother is of sound mind." Miss Theodosia took a bite of toast with caviar and nodded. "She looks perfectly sane to me," she said. Quintessa stood defeated. Then I opened the drawer and pulled out the red folder. Her face went white. "You plan to send me away," I said quietly. "To a state facility." Miss Theodosia gasped. Mr. Sterling frowned. I placed the brochure in Quintessa's shaking hand. "Keep it," I said. "You may need it someday." "You can't kick me out," Quintessa screamed. "I changed the locks," I replied. "Your things are packed." She realized it was over. She grabbed her suitcase and screamed curses as she left. I locked the door behind her. Click, click. Silence returned. But this time it was peaceful. Weeks later, I sat on the balcony with coffee and a fresh sandwich, wrapped in a warm shawl I bought for myself. The apartment was light and empty. It was mine. I was no longer a curator of someone else's future. I was living my own life. And it tasted like freedom. Final question plus CTA. Dear listeners, what do you think? Did Yuli do the right thing? Where is the line between sacrifice and self-destruction? Write your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're listening from. And please support the channel by liking and subscribing. Thank you for listening. With love and respect.